We want to bring in General Carlton Everhart II. He is the commander of Air Mobility Command in the U.S. Air Force. Good to have you, General.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here, Vlad.
So this is a tough morning because we're talking about this alleged chemical attack in Syria. They're investigating this right now. We are still getting information. We're not able to independently confirm what has happened there. But in light of this alleged attack in Syria, how do Air Force troops in the area respond to these types of situations?
Well, I'll tell you, we will get the requirements down from our combatant commanders, the person who's in charge on the ground, and then we will support that through Air Mobility Command, through humanitarian assistance, through air medical evacuation, or supporting the fight overhead through air refueling, and then with our airlift component also.
These are tricky situations, though. It seems like no matter how much we talk about chemical weapons, banning, getting rid of them, every once in a while we see what looks like evidence of this sort of attack. Why is it so difficult for, for us to stop this sort of thing?
Well, the enemy has a vote, so they'll go in areas and they'll produce these things where we may not know where they are. They'll hide them. This, to me, is their last gasp or resort, that they have to go to this method. And I will tell you, that does not go unnoticed, as you just said, and will bring action to bear.
General, for our troops in the region, when these chemical weapons are deployed, and it's not often, but in the case of a chemical attack, what are they trained to do for themselves, to protect themselves, to protect the soldiers and the sailors and the airmen under your command and the others? That's
a great question. We train extensively on the proper gear that we have to have. We train extensively on the tactics, techniques, and procedures that we have to do to avert. I won't send airplanes into an area if it's contaminated, or if I send an aircraft into an area that's contaminated, where do I go for decontamination? Not only the crew, but also the aircraft. We train for this constantly, and it's part of our mainstay of what we do as far as our training. So we're prepared, and we're ready to go at a moment's notice.
The other big incident that we've been talking about over the past few weeks was an airstrike just outside of Raqqa, in which a number of civilians were killed. We know that there was an American airstrike in that area. The question is, were the civilians mistakenly hit, or were they deliberately being used as human shields? This is something that the enemy in that area does. And I want you to talk about how tricky it is. This is, at least the American involvement in Syria, it's mostly about airstrikes. How tricky is it when you're dealing with an enemy that would use a child as a human shield?
Well, there again, a great question. It's something that this enemy has really stooped down to the lowest lows, if you ask my opinion. The commander of Central Command is really responsible for that air war. But from my perspective, we take every precaution before we go into a strike to make sure we don't inflict civilian casualties. And if the enemy is there and it happens that they put them on target, there again, we're trying to deconflict every single thing that we can to prevent that casualty from happening at all.
What can you do? I mean,
there's nothing really more you can do. It's a target. We're watching it. We surveil it. We take every precaution we can to prevent those. And I will tell you, General Votel does an exquisite job making sure that doesn't happen. General Harigian, who is responsible for the air fight over there, they plan, they coordinate, and they make sure to the greatest extent possible that doesn't happen.
How difficult is it managing the airspace in the region when you have Russian aircraft in the area as well?
There again, that's a great point. We have constant communication with the Russians to make sure that we're coordinated for safety of flight, so things don't go bump in the night. We've got to make sure those corridors are safe. From my perspective, Air Mobility Command, I am refueling that fight every single day. 90% of the sorties that are being flown over there, as far as air refueling, are flown by the United States military. And so there's a lot of congestion in that airspace, so that we coordinate for that safety of flight for those corridors to make sure that the airspace is clear when we go into our target.
So that's a good question, and and it's a good point that you make. Very often in the political discourse, especially now, there are a lot of discussions about the United States and how we approach and how we treat Russia. But in a real world situation, in a battleground situation that you're dealing with on a daily basis, the United States military does coordinate very closely with the Russian military.
For the safety of flight, absolutely. They're flying in airspace, we're flying near, and we don't want something to happen to our aircraft because it was a misidentification. So for those safety of corridors or safety of flight, it's imperative that we do that coordination just to make sure that the skies are clear when we have to go after our targets.
How difficult is it, though, when the Russians clearly have one goal in mind when it comes to Syria, for example, and the United States military and the President of the United States has a very different goal when it comes to Syria?
Well, there again, it's that I have to go back into the airspace deconfliction of what we're doing. The goals are too different. They are different. And so as far as that safety of flight, that's where that coordination comes in. We have our own goals, and that's what we're going to go after, and that's what we're going to prosecute, because our President of the United States, our Commander-in-Chief, that's what he wants us to do.
It's interesting, too. I mean, you came you joined the Air Force at a time when the United States was the dominant superpower along with the Soviet Union. How has the world changed? In other words, we're seeing President Trump saying he wants to modernize the weapons, he wants to modernize aircraft, and in some cases the fleet. But other countries have also elevated and also modernized their Air Force and their militaries. How have you seen that change over the last 30, 35 years?
What I've seen is our near-peer competitors have come up. I will tell you, we are still the #1, the world's greatest air power. And we will be for the foreseeable future. That's just not me as a general officer talking. That's me as a citizen taking an assessment and looking at what we have. We have incredible capability. Yes, we need to modernize. Yes, we need to bring up those the tools and weapons to standard, because the enemy has a vote in that. And so they're catching up. They're watching us. They're watching us how we do things logistically. They're watching us how we do things with weapons. Look at the designs that they have. It's curious that they kind of look like the designs we have, because we are the world's greatest air power. And so with that in mind, we're constantly watching. They're coming up to not to a standard, but they're coming up to a level we're saying, hey, we need to increase, modernize to be able to defeat that threat.
General Carlton Everhart, great honor to have you here, sir. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you.